Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Routing with the Gang. I'm your host, Jesus Antonio, and as always, I'm joined by Angel de Jesus and Christopher Lobanos. Today, we're gonna talk about static routes. We're gonna look at a brief introduction in all four kinds of static routes, being those the standard, default, summary, and floating static route.
Hi there guys, I am Angel Luz de Jesus Lopez Ureta, and I will give you a brief introduction to this topic. So, static routes are a kind of network route that is configured manually by the network administrator. This generally appears with an S in the routing tables. This kind of routes are used to have a path to a remote network without the need of a dynamic routing protocol, which can reduce the amount of complexity, network load, and increase a little bit of the safety of the network. Now, let's talk a little bit about the different types of static routes that there is. The first one that we're going to mention is the standard static route, which is the most basic configuration of any static route. To implement it, what we need to do is to go to the router's command line interface and make use of the IP route command, which has different syntaxes depending on the information we know and how we want to use it. The first of its use cases is by the next hop IP address. In this case, what we need to type is, first of all, the name of the command, which is IP route, and then the target network that we want to reach, its IP address, I mean. After that, we need to add its subnet mask, and finally, the address of the next hop that we want to reach. This, of course, has to be directly connected. This kind of implementation is also known as a recursive static route, because in order to reach the destination or to be used, the CPU has to go twice through the routing table of the router so that it can know the exit interface that it's going to use. The next one, which is not recursive, is the exit interface. In this case, we're going to type the same thing, but instead of having the next hop IP address, what we are going to type is the name of the exit interface that we're going to use. In this case, for example, it's the S0/0/0. And the final configuration is the completely specified, in which we first type the name of the interface and then the IP address of the next hop.
Hello everyone, and thanks to be here one more time at Routing with the Gang. Now we're gonna talk about default static routes. So let's get started. On default static routes in which destination networks are not defined, an strategy similar to the last resort is utilized, since it's only going to get used when there is no other way for the router to know how to send the package to the destiny. One may configure it by using an address and setting the mask at 0.0.0.0 followed by the exit interface. Well, it's important to mention that all routes that identify a specific destination with a larger subnet mask take precedence over the default route, and default static routes are used in the following cases: when no other route in the routing table matches the destination IP address of the package. In other words, when there is no more specific match. They are commonly used when connecting a company edge router to the ISP network. An other case is when a router has only one other route to which it is connected. This condition is known as a single connection router. Well, now we're gonna talk a little bit of implementation. Implementing a default static route can be done the same way as with a standard one, but the destiny network and the mask must be 0.0.0.0, which means that any destiny network won't match the route followed by the destiny network. The next hop may be set by any of the means described in this very section of the standard static route. Well, We can do this on Cisco by the command iproute 0.0.0.0.0 as the IP origin and 0.0.0.0 as our subnet mask, and finally with the IP to the destination. Well, that's it, and thanks to be here.
The next type of static route that we're going to mention is the summary static route. This kind of static route is used to reduce the number of entries within a router's routing table. This can be done by referencing a group of adjacent networks with a single IP address and mask, which covers the whole set of networks. Of course, this is only possible if the path that the messages will have to take in order to reach all of these networks involves the same exit interface. To implement this kind of static route, first of all, we need to determine the IP address and mask that our summarized route is going to use. To do this, the first step is to write down all of the target network's IP addresses in binary format. Once we have that, we need to determine the number of shared bits that all of these addresses have. Once we have this, we're going to fill all of the shared bits with 1s and the non-shared bits with 0, and this will give us our network's summary mask. Once we know this, we can return the shared bits values into their originals, and keeping the non-shared bits filled with 0, we will get the network IP address. Once we know all of this information, the only thing left to do is to actually configure the route. To do this, we have to go into the router's CLI and type in the command iproute, followed by our summarized IP address, followed by our summarized subnet mask, and finally followed by the exit interface or next hop IP address of the exit interface that we have to use in order to reach any and all of these networks.
So last of all, we got floating static routes. So these kind of static routes are meant to be used as a backup for another route, be either dynamic or static. So it will be exclusively used in case of failure. So just as a backup. So in order to achieve this, the route must be configured with an administrative distance greater than the main route. So let's say, for example, the main route has been discovered through EIGRP with an AD of 90, then the floating static route must have at least an AD of 91, so that it will choose that route over the main one. But how will you go about implementing this kind of static route? So at the core, it's very similar to a standard route, but the silver lining here is that you have to take into account greatly the administrative distance. Also, remembering it has to be greater than the main route. For example, a normal static route will have an administrative distance of 1, and like we just said before, one discovered through EIGRP will have an AD of 90, taking into account that the IGRP will have an AD of 100, OSPF is 110, ISIS 115, and our RIP is 120. So always take into account, if your main route is discovered through RIP, the administrative distance must be greater than 120. So in order to achieve this, you could add the administrative distance while setting this static route while doing the iproute command, just like this, setting it to 5 in this case. That's how would you go about and implement a floating static route.
Well, having said all of that, we conclude today's episode when we talk a little bit of static routing. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, and smash the like button.
Have a nice Thursday, everyone.